Yes, okay. Okay, so let's talk about splines and nurbs, non-uniform rational B-splines. A spline is simply a line that exists in our 3D space. If we were to render it, there's nothing there because there is no volume to a line. It's infinitely thin, it's infinitely small. And so what we have to do is we have to add volume to it or a third dimension to it. And we do that using nurbs, nurbs. Yes, it's singular. Okay, and so there are a few different types of nurbs that we're going to cover in this class. The extrude, the lathe, the loft, and the sweep. Those are our 4 basic types of nurbs. And by the way, guys, feel free to stop me if I lose you at all, okay? All right, so the first one that we talk about is going to be an extrude nurbs. And the example I always use on this is we used to extrude stuff with the Play-Doh factory. We put a shape in, we pushed down, and out came that shape in a long tube. And so if we were to simply put a shape, and we could create our own shape with some of the drawing tools too, but there's our shape. We're going to put the star into the nurbs. The extrude nurbs itself is the volume or the object. The star is influence in it. So if you think just back to deformations and primitives, we put the deformation in the primitive because the deformation influenced the primitive. Same thing, the extrude is our shape. The star is simply telling us what type of shape to have. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. By default, the extrude NURB is going to push things along the x-axis. The z-axis. And we can see it just extruding out as if it were Play-Doh being pushed out there. Probably the place that I see people use the extrude NURBs the most is using something like a text spline. If I grab my splines. We will call up George and we will love it and we will pet it and whatever. And so the text goes in extrude NURB and all of a sudden I have my default 3D text. Yes? Yeah, okay, good. Any questions on the extrude? Okay. The next one we're going to use is a lathe NURB. If you think of a pottery wheel, or if you've ever done any woodworking, a lathe. When we make a baseball bat or make a table leg, we use what's called a lathe, which is a type of saw. It sits there and spins a piece of wood around, and the blade cuts into it, but it's spinning it around. So the same basic concept here. We're going to spin a spline around, by default, the y-axis. Since we're going to do that, I'm going to just draw in the front view. I work a lot in the two-dimensional views when I'm working with splines because it's easier to keep track of where all the points end up. So let's, in this case, I'm going to just come grab my pen tool and there's my shape. When I put it inside my lathe NURB, get in there. Come on, baby, get in there. Spline. Get in. Okay, fine. I'm going to kill my lathe NURB and put a new one there because I can't seem to drag it today. There we go. When I put my spline inside my lathe NURB, it runs around the y-axis. And so when I jump into perspective mode, I can see that I now have a martini glass because it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? If we have a great desire to, and we can still go access those points and further refine what we have. So just because we've created that shape doesn't mean we can't go in and fine-tune that shape to be whatever it is that we need that shape to really be. Does that make sense, Junior?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions on that?
No.
Do you need another example, or are we good?
I think we're good. Can you show the other two that you were talking about? The other two nurbs?
I'm going to cover them in just a second. So, you were talking about possibly building a tree trunk.
Yes. Well, the leaves for the trees, so I guess the branches. And
Yeah. So, if we were doing the whole tree, the lathe nurb might be a way to generate your trunk. Camera, front. Now we'll have to add some limbs to it later, but we could. The tree's kind of growing up this way. Depends on your type of tree. And this is it would really taper off a lot more than this. But if I were to take that and run it around with a lathe, that would be a tree trunk. Okay, so that's one way that you can go about creating a tree trunk. And then we can build the limbs individually, same method, and then bring them in from other windows and place them inside the tree, place them on the tree. And so that would be how you do it with a lathe nurb. The next nurb that we're going to, nurbs, because nurbs is singular, even though that S makes us think it's otherwise, is a loft nurb. These two take one spline. This one takes 2 or more splines. I'm going to switch over to a top view and grab my pen tool. So if I were to this is supposed to look kind of like a leaf. Obviously, you would round out the edges, and depends on what type of tree or bush it is, but there's my leaf, so to speak. Okay, camera perspective. If I were to put that inside my loft nurb, really, come on thing. I don't know why it doesn't want to play nicely today. There we go. You'll see that we actually have a skin, but it's so thin that it's just going to disappear. And so what we really need to do is have 2 of them. And hold the control key, drag down. Now we have a second one. We have 2 of them. I can grab that top one and pull it out and even rotate it so it's skinnier on one side or another. Or I can go grab the individual points now at the edges and push and pull them up and down. I want that to come down. I want on this spline that point to go up. Okay, but now I have a leaf, so to speak. Okay. The fun thing with loft nurbs is you can do so. You really, with a extrude, you can only push it one direction. With a lathe, you're wrapping. A loft nurb, you can just add 52 different splines and shape it exactly how you want it. I'm going to just grab some basic shapes. We'll just play with cogwheels here for a second. So when I drop all those cogwheels into a loft nurbs, we create a skin inside of it. But each of these splines is still maneuverable. So we can really go in and start to shape exactly what it is we want. This also might be a way to create that tree limb you were talking about. And I'm just gonna assume that it's a nice smooth tree, but there's the beginning of my tree limb. I bring it out, scale it down a little. Oops, let's get it in there. Thank you. And it's going to bend just a little bit. So then duplicate it, pull it out, scale it down, and let's have this one rotate back that way just a little bit. Obviously, it would probably be, you'd have yours go a little bit longer than that, but you can see how I just kept duplicating using command and dragging, duplicating, and then just altered each individual circle. And then I can go in and then now I have tree limbs. Now they don't spike out this way and that way, but it's a good foundation for a tree trunk or a tree limb, and that might be your easiest, most straightforward way to do it. Okay, and that's the loft nurbs. Make sense? Everybody good?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. The last one we're going to work with is a sweep nurb. And with a sweep nurb, what we do is we have two splines, and we're going to run one spline around another. Okay? And so let me go in and grab a helix, because I like to do it with a helix. Start radius 0 and radius 500 and angle 1440. So it's going to do that. Okay, and then we're going to take, and we'll just run, just because I'm not being very creative, a little bitty circle around that helix. And what you see is the circle. Do you see the circle shape right here? The circle got run around that helix. Now we can come in and say, I want the end scale to be 0, and it actually tapers off. So it goes from thick to thin as it comes out. And so that would be a sweep nurb. And just to kind of show that off, I'm going to set my end growth to 0 so you can actually see it. And yes, we can animate this, but You see how it's running that circle around? Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Those are our four main nurbs and just working with splines in general. Did that answer most of your questions?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're good? Okay, let me go ahead and